what I feel, at least being in the more academic world for the last 20 years or so, is so many moments where we're separated from our cerebral, cognitive, and then our bodies and what we're really feeling and feeling into our relationships, right? The sensing into. I think that if we are creating as many opportunities for people to sense into their relationships with, bodies of water, mountains, rivers, prairies, wetlands, whichever ecosystem they kind of already naturally have a relationship with, if we're able to deepen that, just so that there's a little bit more of an embodied awareness of it, to me, that feels like a really important part of reweaving these, relational ways of being.
Welcome to Truth and Reckoning, a broadcast from CELDF. In this show, we'll learn from frontline organizers and communities fighting against environmental destruction. We'll explore different perspectives and innovative strategies for movement building, the potency and the potential of rights of nature, and effective action in defense of our communities. And we'll share inspiring stories of people working towards right relationship with the land and each other. I am your host, Max Wilbert.
Hey, welcome to our audience and to you, Carine. Carine Gibert is who I'm speaking with today here at CELDF's Truth and Reckoning podcast. Carine and I met, it's been a couple of years now, and Carine, actually, we met in person when she came to Cleveland to be part of CELDF's Truth, Reckoning, and Right Relationship with the Great Lakes. That was spring of 2024 already. I can't believe it's been that long. But Carine is the founder and lead facilitator of Grounded in Motion, and she's also part of a project with one of our partner advisors, Talking Wings, and it was called Weaving Rivers, the Weaving Rivers Project. We'll post both the links at the bottom of the podcast so you can click on those, and you'll, I'm sure, be very interested after we have this conversation. But Carine's been curating and designing with communities globally in a common effort to place ecological flourishing at the center of each of her projects. So much of CELDF's work, over the last 30 years, many of you guys know, and I know Carine knows this, has been focused in the law and organizing around the law. And it was, back in 2020 when I met the amazing activist artist, Andrea Bowers, that she taught me what an important role art plays in the movement for recognizing rights of nature, shifting cultural thinking about our connection to and as nature, and how art could enhance our legal work, which she did with the exhibit here in Cleveland, and also how it can expose the work and the movement to a whole new and broader audience. So, using art as a form of resistance is also another, revelation that meeting Andrea and then also you, Carine, as an artist as well, brought to my attention. So I'm really excited to talk with you about all of these topics. But why don't you start with filling us in on what you've been up to since we were together in the spring of 2024?
Yeah, thank you, Tish. I think, one of the things that always stands out for me is this relationship piece. So I'm grateful to you for the relationship that we have. I'm grateful to CELDF for caring about relationships in the true sense of the word, in the sense of, over time, even when there's periods of maybe disconnection because of life's kind of waves that come and then move through, that we're always in relationship. And I think that's true for us with all sentient beings, not just those humans, and the forgetting of those relationships, which is also a very human quality, and the remembering of them. So I think that since Grounded Emotion started, really, I mean, I've been an educator for more than 20 years now, which is kind of crazy, but yes. And Grounded Emotion started really officially in 2018. And the essence of it is this merging of the poetic and the scientific. We focus a lot on this desire for us to know in our bodies, which is where art for me has always been an element of resistance and resilience, actually both, because somehow for many reasons, I think people are more willing to be disturbed or to be moved when they're being exposed to something quote unquote artistic. And when they're in rooms that are more, judicial or policy oriented or even academic, somehow we sort of compartmentalize the body and the mind. And with Grounded Emotion, we're really working on trying to do that as little as possible. So to be in our bodies when we are, academically or intellectually thinking about the ecological crisis and the grief that so many of us are going through. For me, the artistic side started with grief. I think that's really important to say. I think that in 2020, before becoming a mother for the first time, I was experiencing waves of ecological grief that I had never really sat with before in that same way. And it really consumed my body. It consumed my mind. It impacted my teaching. It really impacted my capacity to give, important sort of lessons and content in a hopeful, constructive way. And so I started recording a lot of my writings, which I had always done, but not for any official purpose. And then we started creating soundscapes, which are spoken word pieces accompanied by musicians who were composing for our animate and sentient earth. We sense magic and mourning in our inner layers. Our outer edges caressed or awoken with the winds and rains. We are carbon compositions. Rarely choose to dine in solitude. They fly by the thousands. External forces shaping their movements. Murmurations, whispers. Fluctuations by the sevens, a migration toward the southlands. Multiple movements within its larger form to sanctify and bind. A communion, not of wine, but of murmurs, whispers. And feathers. Sun down, sun up, sunrise, flight. We are surrounded by the thousands, yet struggling to be grounded. They fluttering in one large liquid mass. Uttering low, continuous waves, formations of caves. Resemblance of rivers in the sky with their life in motion. They are reminders of volatile creations, organic dust, flocks that appear to simply trust. murmuring, murmuring to the momentum of our own minds. In flight, we find different shapes. In bodies, we find different tastes. Ecosystems, like our organs, one of many. Migrations above the lands, the seas, a wildlife corridor with no walls, Earth's natural pulse. Murmuration, 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 a fluttering meditation. Whispers, murmurs, whispers, murmurs. Murmur to me. Remind me of those low mycelium weaves. This dance we have been gifted to see. They, akin to the rivers, arteries of the earth, murmuring, murmuring to the momentum of our own minds. Thoughts like their shapes intertwine, fluttering in one large liquid mass. If only we supported all rights to pass. And it's been a beautiful process and has woven its way now into a lot of grounded emotion curation work, a lot of our ecological jurisprudence work, a lot of our, campaign work, a lot of our education work. We use it even now with schools and different students to offer a different sort of entry point into what what the rights of nature movement, I guess, one of them that we could talk.
Yeah, it's so interesting listening to you talk about, your background and how you come to this, and because for me, and talking about how a lot of times in academic um, places, right, spaces that, and even like legal courtrooms, things like that, right, like how it's uncomfortable. Some people feel, but there's also the opposite. Like I would say for me, it was the opposite. I felt very uncomfortable being in an art museum, and thinking about how, like, because that's not something that I was very familiar with
Yeah, yeah,
before all of this. So that can also have, just thinking about cultural change. And that's what's
yeah,
so interesting, because in a community, it takes all of this,
yeah,
but we get so siloed into these different areas, and it's kind of like having to unlearn certain things and learn new things. And, so that's why I just think this whole idea of art, for me personally, it's just so interesting, because it was the complete opposite. I came from the background of everything's very practical, and you have to be, around experts in those
right.
locations, right? Or where the experts are, and the people that somehow hold all this, I don't know, knowledge or expertise. So that idea of bringing them together was
Yeah,
really interesting to me, right? That
yeah,
we do that. And I think for a lot of people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the spaces that we all move through, and like you said, it takes all of us, right? So depending on what our background is, the shifts that we make, um, I think that's what's important, is maybe feeling that shift in ourselves, which is just really looking at it possibly from a different perspective. I mean, law and academics is all constructed, right? Like we've constructed all of these things. And I think what I feel, at least being in the more academic world for the last 20 years or so, is so many moments where we're separated from our sort of, cerebral, cognitive, and then our bodies, and what we're really feeling, and feeling into our relationships, right? The sensing into. Um, I think that if we are creating as many opportunities for people to sense into their relationships with bodies of water, mountains, rivers, prairies, wetlands, whichever ecosystem they kind of already naturally have a relationship with, if we're able to deepen that, just so that there's a little bit more of an embodied awareness of it, to me, that feels like a really important part of um, reweaving these, relational ways of being. And the arts for me was, I guess, and in counter to what you're saying, was the more natural way to go about that, which I completely appreciate that that's not, the way that it is for everybody. And but it allowed me to actually bring my sort of brain and heart together,
Yeah,
which
it's so
was
interesting, like the people that you come in contact with, how they can really impact and change your whole perspective.
yes.
Because
Thank you.
I've always been connected to water, right? And always just loved being by water. But because being educated and raised in this culture didn't, it wasn't until the art element came in and contact with more people like you and Andrea and all the other artists that participated and have come across my path, in the last 5 years, where I really have been able to feel like, oh, that makes sense now, right? Like
Mhm.
that we are water. I mean, it's running through our veins, that this is the connection to place where I am. Lake Erie, Cleveland, it's, here. And so it all fit together. It was kind of like a puzzle that I didn't have the pieces to. And so, yeah, I really appreciate it. And then you brought a whole new element with the sound, of that. Never think like, yeah, we all know we're all as little kids taught we have five senses, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that, but it's kind of like from the scientific standpoint, the parts of our body that, but it's never all brought together in that way. So yeah, I really.
Yeah. And I think,
Mhm.
I'm so grateful to you as well, because I think in the end, there are a lot of artists and if, try, if I'm a trained educator or a trained academic, but there are so many of us that are artists that are also finding their way into bringing that into something that they feel so strongly and often feel disempowered to do because they don't have the practicality, or at least the way that society has, kind of shaped that to mean. So having people that know what it looks like to draft a piece of legislation to help a community or to help us think about articulating it so that it makes sense in a system sort of, I guess, in a legal framework, right? That has also been a huge learning lesson for me to see, okay, well, where are the places that this can be? And of course there's disenchantment on both sides, right? I think that's the challenge, is like there's disenchantment with the feeling that law is going to make the difference. There's disenchantment with the feeling that the art is going to make the difference. And it's all going to make the difference, right? And
Mhm.
and that's really important. I think for me, with working with the youth groups, I've had to remind myself time and time again that it's really not helpful and supportive, specifically supportive for youth to be told how bad things are. Because things are, in certain places and in certain moments, pretty devastating from an ecological from many perspectives, but from an ecological perspective. And I think I've learned over the years. I'll never forget, in 2012, my first graduating class, there was a student who I had, really grown to know, and he left my class, saying, I came into this class and it was the first time that I saw so much, so many wildfires, so many hurricanes, so many, and just because I was sharing with him the realities of some of what was happening. And I remember as a really young teacher after that thinking, this is not what I want to do. I don't want to, impart sort of devastation on these students. I want to share reality. And it makes me think of, Rebecca Solnit writes a lot about this, right? Hope in the dark, and that sort of blind, enthusiastic optimism, but also the necessary sort of hope as something where we really believe that, the efforts of art and education and law and the combination of it all, is a movement that is moving things, even if slowly, and against a current that is very, very powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's true. Like I'm trying to work with youth too, and that's come about since the event in Cleveland, the Truth, Reckoning, and Right relationship, because it allowed there was professors and academics there besides some students, right? And so they have connected me, and I feel the same thing. And it's about that idea of making them feel like they belong to this community, which is made up of all those parts.
Yeah.
And all these different people with all these different skills and different knowledge and experiences, and we all contribute. And it's that collective that can make the difference and the change. For me, that's where the hope is, at least for me. It's that I'm part of this community, bigger, larger community. And of course, Lake Erie's part of that community, right? The whole bioregion, if you live, close to or in a wetlands area, or if you live in a desert or whatever, that's all part of the community as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So it is
Yeah.
interesting, and to give students, that perspective that no, you are important because you're part of this, and together it's that collective that we can make changes.
Yeah, and it's interesting where sometimes, at least from the educator side, it's interesting where the pushback comes. I mean, I've had over the years, some very difficult conversations with, if it was, parents of high schoolers, or if it was, university students that are sort of unlearning what they, have kind of grown up knowing, or the that the content sometimes in these environmental systems classes or sustainability classes, or that again, it's disassociated from the animate, right? And so I think animism for me, almost from a spiritual perspective, sometimes is defiant and is resistant, because it's essentially really over and over again kind of reminding and infusing in all of the content the aliveness of the earth, the aliveness of our earth, the aliveness of so much of, what language has slowly created to be separate from us as living, or us as, sentient. And that's where I've had some really interesting pushback, even from school boards. Sometimes I'm working with schools that are powerful schools, in the sense that, they have a certain standing, and they have a certain recognition, and to infuse almost a spiritual component into the curricula can be, in and of itself, seen as a resistance movement. And that's been really important for me to stand by, even when it isn't necessarily easy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm getting the same, kind of from professors I'm talking to at some of the universities here, right? It's the administration and the board of trustees, and that they have one, vision, which is usually money driven, right? It's all
Yeah.
about money. And so it's like, yeah, that how does that all fit in? Um, and so you can't say this, or you don't want to talk about this, or this is where, even the classes that get canceled, right? Because it only has, a few, it's not profitable enough.
Right.
So it's again how universities are like not necessarily all about, you know, critical thinking, teaching students that, and really educating them in what they're interested in. They're kind of funneling students into careers where you know, the the businesses and corporations and industry need to fill positions.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hmm
Yeah,
And
and
so
I
what
mean,
you're doing is hard, right? Like, how do you fit that into a profession, right?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you also see, I think, the almost the energy that there is for it, especially the youth that I am teaching right now in some of my, semester courses. Um, I mean, some of them, I think about, of course, I graduated high school 2003. I was at, a school that was considered pretty progressive. It was an international community. We had very little, ecological literacy. We had very little on certain component could have been part of the curricula at the time. But some of the students that I teach, they've been talking about climate change probably since they were, I don't know, in kindergarten.
What I notice is that they know, like those kids that, especially that are in environmental studies and, those kind of programs, sustainability, like they
Mhm.
know there's something wrong, like the stuff they're being taught, like, but they can't put their finger on it, like
Yeah.
exactly what it is or.
Some of these students at this point, they have been learning, quote unquote, about climate change since they were in kindergarten.
Mhm.
They've been learning about almost 15, 16 years. So I put myself in their position and think, can you imagine if I was being taught for 16 years this thing that is happening, and it's not, there's no real there doesn't seem to be a real, response that is, in my mind, responding to the urgency that it's
Mhm.
being taught to us. I mean, it's almost like a dissonance that they have to almost accept, which is very strange, right? I mean, if you were being taught that there is something, that is, you know, eroding our community and eroding our environment, and that we clearly have a lot of ways in which we could actually address some of it very quickly. I mean, I always give them the example of, light pollution, which is one of the ones that we've been composing actually a piece for the last year and a half. And we've been working on the lyrics, and we've been working on it with the musicians, and we've been talking about what kind of an installation would we create, even just to raise awareness around the negative effects of light pollution on wildlife and on migration paths. And some of these things are so complex, right? We know, obviously, addressing some of the ecological stressors are so complex, but some of these things like light pollution or sound pollution seem fairly simple when you are speaking to, a 10-year-old, or you're speaking to an 8-year-old, and reducing the light pollution or reducing the sound pollution, and the amount of, invertebrates that you're going to save, the amount of birds that are going to be able to migrate. And so I think sometimes I think it's interesting to talk to these students about their experience as a student hearing about climate change for so many years. And oftentimes one of the first things that I do when they start a grounded in motion, or they start a course at their school that's the grounded in motion has been involved in the design of it, is ask them, what is your history with environmental, activism, exposure, or climate change curricula? Because it really gives me a good understanding of what their emotional state is, almost in response to some of this content, which to me is really important before, teaching them another class about environmental justice or environmental activism.
Mhm. Yeah, that is really interesting though that they've been like hearing and learning about climate change for all those years, right? It's like almost their whole life. And
Yeah.
in a way, I mean, it's kind of like how, and then we talk about how they normalize, industry normalizes, right? Like bad things and
Yeah.
stuff. But on this case, it's like it makes me almost wonder then it's like, do they not see it as like, is it not real? You know what I
Right.
mean? Because you've been talking about it for so long and all these
Right.
horrible things were supposedly going to happen and they
Yeah.
didn't. And so are they more like skeptical that it's even real?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a very, and it's a very, and then, because I do work in the international communities, and I work with school. I mean, I'm based right now in New York, and, still working with the Lycée Français, which I've been teaching at since 2012. I did some work with the United World Colleges. I've been doing some work now with the International Baccalaureate schools, which, and part of that is my background, because my mother was from the U.S. and my father is French. I was born in France and raised in Europe, so my identity, right, of is quite tied to some extent to an international, or when I was a child, a European almost identity, and those cultural settings, those political settings all make a difference in terms of,
Mhm.
what's the culture like. But regardless of where you are, if climate change has been something that you've been exposed to in a school setting, and you were born in early 2000s, it's been 20 years that you've been learning about climate change in school.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of, yeah, it's kind of dystopic when then they see what are the realities, even. And one of the big efforts that I've been spending a lot of time on these last few years is actually demonstrating and showing to them all the different ways in which, at this point, you could pick any industry, and there's possibility for you to make a significant sort of shift in awareness around our relationship with the natural world, and
Mhm.
us being part of nature.
Yeah, that we are. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you led right in bringing up, climate change. So that leads right into you had attended Climate Week
Mm,
in New York City, and I think you've attended those in the past as well.
mm.
And so I'm kind of curious, just maybe you can give us a little report on, what you saw there, how it compared to previous Climate Weeks you've attended, and just overall, what do you think of that event?
Yeah. I think, again, I always go back to the importance of being in our bodies, and feeling into some of these discussions. I think there's so many gatherings where there's a separation of body and mind in the conversations. There's panelism fatigue almost, going to panel after panel and conference after conference, which I think many people, feel in different versions of it. So this year, actually, I was part of a curation and art installation called Between Waves. Um, and it was a master's thesis of a girl who I met kind of by chance. She emailed and she thought she was emailing someone else. And then she found out I was the founder of Grounded in Motion. It was one of those very sort of, happy coincidences. So I worked on the co-curation of it. And the focus was to some extent around ecotourism and the role of, coming into different communities, but it was about the ocean and, marine life, and specifically about Don Sol in the Philippines, where she's from, and the practices of swimming with whale sharks. Don Sol, like Holbox in Mexico, is where the largest whale shark communities in the world are. And it was actually one of those really wonderful experiences where being in relationship with all the different people that ended up being part of this curation and installation are, community builders, they're community activists, they're working at different levels to just have conversation. And one of the things we talked a lot about was, conversation and conservation, and all these things are all about these relationships. Um, and building these relationships. And the curation was many, many different artists that were sharing their work on honoring the ocean. And it was really about honoring the ocean, or about honoring the bodies of water that have raised us, and that they are equally a part of how we have been raised. They're an ancestor. They are, the ocean has all of these different sort of messages that people were writing letters to. So we had a station where, we were asking people to write letters directly to different parts of the ocean or bodies of water that they felt closer to, and sort of an archive of it, so that it was also just a moment for people to step out of some of the policy briefs and policy panels and things like that. Which, again, I really want to emphasize that I think it's very easy to become critical of so many of these spaces, and there's so much criticism that's valid. And at the same time, I think we need all of us. It takes everyone at this point for a paradigm shift to happen. But I think people, they are kind of tired of being in rooms where there's 1,000 different policy drafts and so many different people participating, and then, the policies don't even get passed, or they're ignored, or they're not even, brought to the, level of governance that has, potentially the power to enact them. But so the curation process, and the installation process, and the featuring of different smaller organizations, was a humbling experience, and also one that was really grounded in relationship building, so that, we can continue to work on this, and have these different installations. And we're hoping to actually have one in Boston soon. So there was that. I brought a couple of students to read letters that they had written about humans as potential keystone species, to the Earth Law Center gatherings. And so, I think again, you know, CELDF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, I think for me, when I started working with you and the different, and, some projects that I've had with the Earth Law Center or projects that I've had with Garn or projects, different things, I think it's interesting because the idea is that the movement is one thing and then the relationships are something else. And so it's been really interesting for me to um, identify the essence of what everybody really cares about and reminding myself that that's really what we're all working at. We're all working towards and hoping to have these consciousness shifts. And for the students, I think it was a really wonderful opportunity for them to also see that what they're doing in the classroom as 10th graders, because this was specifically two 10th grade students of mine, they had all kinds of people in the room listening to them. People who are drafting policy, people who are lawyers, people who are municipal representatives. And I think that's important for them to see so that it's not siloed in the classroom either. Because a lot of students, I think, feel like what they do in school really doesn't connect to the real world.
Hmm. No, yeah, and I feel too like what you said, like that there's positives and negatives with these gatherings, right? Because I'm always so torn. I was at an event Saturday, and it was a group that's trying to work on building a community here in this bioregion, and yet so many people left then to go to a No Kings protest, and I'm like, but you were here at this creating something new, right? For them,
Yeah.
and so, yeah. But like even the climate stuff, I mean, I agree. And that's why I'm curious, were there more new people there? Or a lot of times it winds up being the same people, right? It's like
Yeah.
they're talking like even all these COP things, like, oh, we're going to fly off to Dubai one year and now we're flying to Brazil this year. And you're really just a lot of times talking to mostly the same people who can
Yeah.
come, right? Environmental activists. And it's like, I mean, that's all fine to connect and build relationship with them. But to me, the reality is that building the community, nobody
Yeah.
focuses that much on bringing that all together in a place-based community.
Yeah. 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 I think in New York, it varies so much because there are so many people, new youth voices that I am exposed to because I am working so much with youth groups that are creating, especially with the arts, creating new exhibits or new places of gathering to be in community. There were a couple of initiatives that I think over the past couple of years have sort of separated from Climate Week, but still are doing their events during Climate Week because they know that there are so many more people that are interested and really want to know more about, the Gowanus Canal, or they want to know more about the waters of New York, or they want to know more about the Great Lakes Bill of Rights. That's, part
Yeah.
of, there were some sort of theater pieces because theater and again, the performing arts has this sort of potential sometimes to really be more in the body. It's about, there's empathy, and it's just art can then sometimes have a bigger impact than a piece of legislation because somebody sees it and somebody's not kind of in their normal, framework, and they're willing to be moved and recognize, wow, this is hitting something else and making me think about
Hmm.
it in a new way. So there's definitely, and there's, in Europe, maybe more than in the US, I see the culture of shaming, especially around travel, or the culture of sort of, being very, I think, critical of people flying all over the world to get together for conferences, which makes perfect sense when, like you said, a lot of times it's the same
Same
people,
people. Yeah.
moving around. And then, I think that Climate Week in particular in New York, I mean, this is the one that I attend because I live here, right? But there's Climate Weeks all over the world. And I think it raises the same conversations as, other emphasized weeks, like when students have, uh, Women's History Month or Black History Month or Indigenous people. It's like it's all these sort of tokens, but really it's always the
Right.
history
Yeah. Earth
of
Week, right? That's the big
Earth
one.
Week
Yeah.
or
We're
Earth Day or
yeah.
all the
Yeah.
things. Um, and I feel that at this point, specifically from my educator's perspective, it's best for me not to use so much energy on my frustrations with that, and place my energy in the elevating of the consciousness.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I find myself and so does in that same space a lot of times too,
Yeah.
and, trying to look at, well, what benefit do you get out of these things? You
Yeah.
know, and I think, as long as you have that mindset, and you understand that, and then you can do that's the whole point of consent, isn't it? That you know both sides and then you get to decide, right? Like, yeah, should I go? Shouldn't I go? What are, you know, the
Yeah.
positives for this? And yeah, so it's all good.
Yeah, it's
Um,
hard. It's hard, and I think, to some extent, it's very much just aligned with integrity
mhm.
and how we're in integrity with what our values really are.
Right, exactly, the whole value and not only that, that idea that I've been saying that more lately, it's like that idea of just even having environmental activists, is kind of a problem because it's like that makes it so easy for everyone else to go, "Oh, well, the environmental activists are gonna fix it," right?
Yeah.
And it's just that mindset, and it's like, "No, we're all part of this." Like you said, we're all connected to this place, to this water body, to this we have to all together. It's not any one group or person's, responsibility to do that. It's all our responsibility. So,
Yeah, and I think, it's been interesting with some of the musical compositions. One of the things that we kind of found that was quite powerful is that sometimes, when you're in a space where there's already a clear agenda, so in this case, you're mentioning the environmental activism agenda, we're already in the community, right? So we're already in our own silo. And so with the spoken word pieces, those have ended up in places that are about poetry or that are about music.
mhm,
And so inevitably, that is already a new space where people, aren't coming just because they are part of the environmental activism communities. But then the conversations are about caring for our earth. And they happen in a space that wasn't labeled environmental activism, right? And that's
mhm,
really, I think, also in the last couple of years been something that I'm really working towards is how can we be in spaces that are just about gathering to talk about what we value and what we, our hopes are for future generations, for current generations, and for the consciousness of this animate, breathing, living earth to be more in our consciousness on a daily basis.
mhm. Yeah, I don't. You mentioned, we talked about it and you touched on it a little bit at the beginning about art being resistance. But that's CELDF's new program area, our newest program area. I mean, we've always had the legal services and the education, but this idea, community resistance and resilience
Mm.
program area. And so I'm really curious to hear more if you have more to say, like how art can be. I remember Andrea at the Truth and Reckoning event in her presentation, her workshop. And it just stuck with me where she said she sees art as like a Trojan horse.
Mm.
That it can insert these ideas and stuff into places that normally you might not be able to go. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on, that and how you see art and even some of the work you specifically do, as resistance or resilience.
Yeah, I think many of us agree on this, that it's something about its power to dismantle preconceived sort of expectations of what is coming or what is, how something is going to be addressed. Um, I think that any opportunity that we have where we can sense into what our feeling or our and sometimes I think the criticism then becomes, oh, this is all about emotion, and then there's or it's more uh, I think diluted into something that is then missing the sort of scientific substance, because it's interesting because that's a criticism that happens.
Hmm.
The sort of the ecological content is inaccurate in this way when spoken word, is talking. We
Hmm.
did a piece on, soil health And it was, poetic, and there are different lyrics almost that, yeah, you deconstruct them and say they're scientifically, inaccurate sometimes, or they, and that's where, it's again, I've been thinking so much about, it's the energies, like where are we placing the energy? And similarly, I think when Andrea says, is the Trojan horse, I actually just heard the founder of this theater company called Theater, which is based in South Africa, and they do, different. I mean, it would be a lot to share, but they do different theater pieces about community issues specifically, not only strictly about the environment, but it's more about what someone is willing to receive and how open they might be willing to be, or even subconsciously are, when someone says this is art, and might just be because then our, sort of trained brains of, what are the metrics and what are the facts and what's accurate and what's not accurate, can sort of be on pause for a little bit and say, okay, I'm not going to look at this, with metrics and or this or that. I'm just going to see this for what it is.
Right.
And with art, that happens, I guess, because almost it's like the label art, which, uh, I mean, again, it's all semantics, right? But it could have its own issues. But it's almost like the label allows for a different perception of what is being shared. Um,
That's interesting
and
because I think for me, when you just said that, it's like, well, it allows feelings and emotions, right? Whereas everything else, science is supposed to be devoid of those. The
right.
law is supposed to be devoid.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it's
Right.
like, but it
And I
opens that
mean,
up.
and you and I have spoken about this so many times, but I mean, that's just, it's inaccurate, right? Like laws are
Hmm.
created because of values, right? So that
Hmm.
comes from, in my mind, I mean, that's a feeling, right? You have a value, you care about something.
Hmm.
There's a law that's created to, in theory, protect that value, or protect, and we know that that's obviously, we see that
Right.
not being the case, right? In many instances, but um, if it's about reflecting our values, and then this is what really the education work is with grounded emotion, is it's like, so then what really are our values and what really are the perspectives? And in the international baccalaureate schools that I work in, so there's an IB course called Environmental Systems and Societies. And one of the chapters is really all about worldviews and ethics and perspectives, and if you have a culture, and of course, indigenous cultures and other cultures that have woven into their cultural fabric this idea of reciprocity, of relational existence with, non-humans and the more than human, then your values are already there. So, then, what does that look like in terms of the actions? What does it look like in terms of
Hmm.
protection? What does that look like in terms of resistance, right, to things that are harming it?
Hmm.
Um, but for us, I think, I mean, and when I say us, all the different people that I collaborate with, because Grounded Emotion is, I founded the project, but every project is a collaboration with different artists or different educators or lawyers, and and the art is it's one more way to not be siloed into a room where everybody already is in the same sort of, perspective, and on the same track.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love that you brought in the relational because I've been hearing that a lot lately too. Our culture is so transactional, right? Versus the relational. We need to get much more relational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people, and the grief, I think also that a lot of people feel, that's a result in so many ways of that, right? It's isolation. I mean, and another really interesting element on grief, is, grief almost being something that now is also like behind closed doors, as opposed to like public rituals, public
Hmm.
gatherings, public. I mean, there's another incredible artist that have done different collaborations with. And, we've had these conversations like, what if there were all these memorials about, all of the species that are, being that we've lost, or all of the,
Mhm.
and it was a visual representation of death, of all the death that is happening.
Mhm.
We've had these collective mournings. We did something called water walks, where we were grieving collectively around lost waters, and if that was part of the public experience, um, it's also it's not denied. It's just it's there, and we can feel it, and we can reckon with it, right? I
Mhm.
remember that was something with Cleveland, and finally meeting you in person. I really liked that term, reckoning, because it felt like an acknowledgement of many things,
Mhm.
and we do that most effectively for consciousness to shift in community, not alone. I mean, of course, there
Mhm.
are important isolated moments of many emotions, grief as one of them. But when we're trying to shift something that's systemic, if we're grieving individually, I have a hard time seeing how that then can translate. When we are collectively grieving something that we're losing, that
Mhm.
feels like then there's going to be a more, correlated systems shift.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I really like the reckoning too, because I always talk about, the truth part too, those two together, that you have to be really honest with where we're at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that's really hard,
Yeah.
and people have a hard time with that one because they don't want to admit, like, we're part of this. We didn't have
Yeah.
a choice. I mean, that whole thing. But you have to start there so that you can actually reckon with some of those things to actually move to a place of right relationship, a better place. But if you're starting from a place, where you're not really being honest
Yeah.
about it, then how can you reckon with that, right? I mean,
And how can
so.
you then really generate something new, right? If we
Mhm.
want to, in both, for the youth, but also just in society, if we want to really start to imagine a flourishing future, we talk about that a lot with grounded emotion,
Mhm.
is thinking about what does a ecologically flourishing future feel like and look like. I really agree with you. I think in order for that to be uh true, and in order for it to be realistic, and in order for it to be actually hopeful, there is a grieving that happens,
Mhm.
to acknowledge, what we've lost. And there's a project
Mhm.
you're probably familiar with, called All We Can Save. Um,
Mhm.
and it's interesting because there's that's a project where I've often found there's a recognition of the grief and the hope, and part of it is
Mhm.
all we can save, because so much of it is I mean, this is my interpretation of it, but it's like because so much has been lost and is being lost, but there is so
Mhm.
much that we still have to save. And
Right.
that's one of the things, right, when I speak with students, where uh, that has to really be, you know, put forth when you're young, and you're thinking about how to contribute to this, especially if you value it. So much, there's still so much to save, in spite of how much we have lost, and how much we have,
Right.
and how much the ecosystems are in degradation, and have been extracted, and uh and that's a truth. It's a truth.
Mhm. Yeah, our Will Falk, who you met also, and who
Yeah.
works with CELDF, one of our lawyers,
Yeah.
he talks about that a lot. And
Yeah.
it's like all that we've lost. It's like, and we don't even acknowledge it. Like, so many people don't even know, or like people I talk to, that, like, yeah, you can have a lake die and it could be totally dead. You can't bring it back. People always tend to think like, oh, well, we can fix it. We can,
Yeah.
because that's how our system's set up. We'll just put money into it and we can fix it.
Yeah.
Well, when a species is extinct and gone, you can't fix that. But,
Yeah.
science, they always go to science. Like, well, it can. Maybe if we have some of the DNA, we can, like the
Yeah.
Jurassic Park thing, or
Yeah.
if the lake's dead, of course we can bring it back. It's like, no. I mean, it's like when
Or
they try to
also,
recreate wetlands,
yeah,
you
or
can. It
else,
took nature thousands of years to create
right.
that wetland, right?
That's what
And
I
you're
was
going to get
about
a
to say.
bulldozer, dig a hole. They did it in my community, right? And like, we'll put some plants around it, and now it's a wetland. It's like, that's
Yeah.
not how that works.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna say. I was gonna say that it's like the time factor, again. It's interesting. It comes into different pieces. I mean, we talk about good ancestorship quite a bit in grounded
Mhm.
emotion curricula, and inspired by all sorts of different educational, values and theories of um, some of Joanne Macy's work, and some of, again, like good ancestorship as sort of something
Mhm.
to inspire, but also to think about shifting our relationship to time, deep time practices. Yeah, people will say, well, we can just plant all these forests again. They can we just replant them. And it's like, well, 1,000-year-old tree isn't going to be, you know, replaced by, a tiny little, yeah, especially not a monoculture forest that's being planted.
No. And other things have shifted, right? The water
Exactly.
now is different than it was, you know,
Exactly.
150 years ago when it was planted
Yeah,
originally, right?
exactly.
Or this it landed there, right? Or, I mean, it's like it's all the air's different, everything's different, so it's never gonna be the same.
Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
interesting with the youth too, because I think it's sort of, unfortunately, you know, the culture of sort of like the immediacy factors,
Mhm.
that in a way I think really is in juxtaposition with the natural world, right? Because there's such a
Yep.
disassociation with our relationship to time. I mean, mine included, um, growth of food, growth of, I mean, all sorts of things,
Mhm.
right? Where it's like there's
Right.
this long process, and that is a very different embodied experience than the immediacy of what so much of our culture it is now.
Technology. Yeah, what
Right.
technology does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's something else about your work maybe we didn't cover, reflections or anything else you want listeners to know, please, and where they can reach you kind of thing.
Yeah,
Let
no,
us
no.
know.
I think, just I mean, the Grounded in Motion website is a great place to start. And there's a variety of different examples of what some of our education collaborations look like, what some of our artistic curations look like. And our I, I'm sort of now in a new space around, rights of nature, and my thinking around how that weaves itself into my work with Grounded Emotion. Um, so that's something that is a part of the curations and is a part of the education. Oftentimes, also because there are so many communities and so many environments where there's very little is known actually about that, which is hard. When you're in it, you think it's what everybody else is in. But there's a lot of students, when I share what the
Mhm.
rights of nature movement is about or ecological jurisprudence, they've never heard of it before. So I think it's important. Um, and yeah, we work with many different types of education initiatives, and always hoping to find many students who then feel like what they're studying is relevant to what their values are, which is always really nice.
Yeah, that's always good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, they would be less depressed, I would think, if they can
Yeah,
find that.
for sure.
It never feels good, yeah, when you're studying. Yeah, and it doesn't connect. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Or you feel like
The
siloed
other
into something else.
Yep. I was just going to let listeners know too that, we know that media is being like controlled a lot more and, all that stuff that we're not like what you just said, students aren't even aware, right?
Mm.
Like, so rights of nature, that's not something that's on like mainstream media, right? They don't hear about this stuff.
No.
And so, you know, us and along with so many other places, we're trying to, that's why we're doing this podcast. They
Yeah.
might not learn about your work, right? And things like that with people you wouldn't hear about otherwise. So I just want people to remember that if they're listening and they like this, to consider subscribing to our Substack page so we can keep doing these kind of conversations and exposing you guys to work that you might never, hear about or from people you might not get to hear from.
I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways you can support Truth and Reckoning. First, share this broadcast with your friends and family. leave a positive review via your podcast app. Visit the Truth and Reckoning YouTube channel and leave a thumbs up and a comment. The full scope of the work of CELDF, including this show, comes with a financial cost. So if you're able to make a donation, go to CELDF.org. That's CELDF.org. But most importantly, our goal for this show is to empower you to take action. So the best way you can show your support is to get involved with your community and protecting the place where you live. Thank you very much.